All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. All around the world, we have chief marketing officers, other growth leaders, and other interested parties joining us here on this Institute for Real Growth, Humanizing Growth webinar series. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Institute for Real Growth team to this webinar series, where we are talking every Friday at the same time, same place. Frank van den Driest, the co-founder of the Institute for Real Growth, and myself will be talking to at least another 10 leaders over the next few weeks. And we started these webinars about a month ago. And if you've missed them, we spoke to Miguel Patricio, the CEO global of Kraft Heinz, and Jody Harris from ABI. We will be speaking to Keith Weed, formerly of Unilever, now a board member of WPP, Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, Silvia Lagnado, the Chief Sustainable Growth Leader of Natura, Antonio Lucio, the Chief Marketing Officer of Facebook. And today, I'm especially happy to welcome Michael Diamond, professor of the New York University School of Professional Studies, and partner from day one of the Institute for Real Growth. Good morning, Michael.
Morning, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
Where are you?
I'm well, thank you. Safe and well in Connecticut with my family. I think on week 7 or 8, as we all are, of sheltering in place. So,
well, it's especially good to have you here. Are you doing well with family, I assume?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the sort of silver linings of this whole experience has been this opportunity to spend more time with your family, and hopefully all of us can say that. I know family life can be challenging, but I certainly have really found it a privilege to see my wife more regularly and spend time with my boys who are here with me in Connecticut. My daughter is in London and working in London, so we get to see her on various Zoom calls and family quiz nights and everything. But it's been a real privilege, I think, just to get some of that quality time with the kids that otherwise would have been commuting time or travel time. So I'm harvesting all the good out of this that I can.
Well, I ask because, of course, we're all Zooming these days, and I think particularly the audience that's listening today is representative of the people that used to travel a great deal all over the world, and now suddenly found that life screeched to a halt and are indeed cooped up with family. And people ask me a lot, how are you? And my honest answer is conflicted, because on the one hand, I don't think there'll be another time in my life where I spend this much time with my wife and with my children in a place where we want to be. And at the same time, I'm upstate New York, and just 2 hours south of here, all the things that we've read and seen on the television news about New York are happening. And I think that shared sense of confliction is prevalent. Yeah, I owe you a proper introduction, Michael. Michael, as I said, is a professor at New York University, but he's a former CMO at Time Warner Cable. So he was on the other side, if you like, before. And before that, a business consultant at Booz Allen. And as you will hear during this conversation, a very relevant and important combination of roles. And also a partner from day one of the Institute for Real Growth, together with Andrew Stevens of the Said Business School at Oxford University. Michael and Andrew have been comrades at arms with us from the very first moment. But what's also interesting to mention is a little bit your background, Michael, because I think it's actually telling for the theme of today's conversation, which is about, is it data analytics or creativity, or is it actually more about human centricity and whole brainness? Because you did Oxford, fantastic, but then chose Yale MFA for theater management. And that's not one that I've seen very often. So can you talk a little bit about that? Why Yale and why theater management?
Right. Well, I think I was brought up in a home that, really loved the arts and privileged music and theater and the spoken word. So it was already in my bones and in my family to sort of be involved in those things. But it was also a very practical, pragmatic sort of business family. My father was an entrepreneur and an electronic engineer by training. So, I think in my family, I already had that sort of interest in the arts and management. And so Yale was a wonderful place to be. It had a great reputation. The Yale School of Drama and the Yale Repertory Theatre had an amazing reputation for training theatre artists in all sorts of disciplines, launching the careers of writers, people like Atho Fugar in the US and August Wilson and others. It was also an incredibly practical place, which I really liked. I had done 3 years of sort of good, solid academic study at Oxford, but I wanted somewhere to learn a craft in a really practical way. And it is more generally just this extraordinary sort of conservatory of training, of interdisciplinary training. And I think that's was one of the more powerful things, one of the more important things about it, and also one of the the nuggets or really gems I mined for later in life. This capacity to theatre making is by its nature a very interdisciplinary, very collaborative thing, and I both enjoyed that, and I think it sort of set me up for a future career as well.
Well, see, now we're going to talk a lot about that because I just honestly didn't know that about Yale. And when you started explaining a little bit during our preparations about this interdisciplinary approach, of course, lots of flags went up on my side because that connects directly to all the discussions that we're having around the need for whole brainness, bringing together creativity and data and man and machine, if you like. And so we'll get into that more, but I think it's a wonderful testament that you've done that journey, both sides. And then I have to ask you, why the Institute for Real Growth? Because you really were one of the very first participants and partners.
Well, I think even as a marketer, I was always scanning the literature, so to speak, both the academic and the sort of applied professional literature to look for the best and the brightest ideas. And I remember very distinctly reading both Marketing 2020 and Insights 2020, which is something that both you and Frank worked on. I think it both published, if I remember, in the Harvard Business Review, and just being very struck by that work. And then somewhere I saw a notice that you were working again on a project on real growth. It just struck me as a very interesting project to take on at this time. I think we hadn't quite framed the word humanizing growth at the time, but the notion that there was another way to think about growth and the role of the CMO. And I was lucky I got in touch with Mark Reed, who was a former friend and colleague, or still a friend, I hope, but a former colleague from Booz Allen Hamilton days, and he put me in touch with you guys. And I think we all saw, I remember meeting with you in your apartment in New York, and I think we saw the potential for the concept and the ideas and the research to actually find a home in an educational program, in an institute, and use it for the training of CMOs or emerging young professionals. And that's obviously what I've now dedicated my professional life to. So I was absolutely thrilled to sort of be part of that. And I think so much of what you and Frank are writing and researching and engaging people around resonates both with my personal experience and with what I think we need to be training today in our field. So,
yeah, well, that's nice to hear. It's true. So a lot of the people that are listening today are participants in this Institute for Real Growth leadership program, and it's probably good to just give 2 minutes background on that. The leadership program really was built, as you said, on previous studies which looked at both the the article was actually called The Ultimate Marketing Machine. What does the marketing department of the future look like? And then the second article was very much led by Frank around what does the inside organization look like, but also how do you drive customer centricity throughout an organization. But over those two programs, we obviously talked to a lot of chief marketing officers and their colleagues in the C-suite. And the theme that kept recurring was that of business growth and actually marketing's ability to influence that. Marketing's influence and also somewhat credibility to influence the business strategy. Now, as you said, you've been with us right from the beginning, and one of the things that you talk about within the curriculum of the leadership program, which brings together over 100 of these CMOs and growth leaders from Shanghai, New York, and Oxford, is actually preparing and winning in the world that is to be. And you taught a program within that called The World in 2025, Winning in the World in 2025. And of course, that's way before COVID struck. So before we go into a discussion on what you're seeing as changes, I want to do something new and actually run a poll among the viewers on what they are actually experiencing as the key developments of the recent 2 months. So I'm going to launch a poll, and I would ask everybody to just take a few seconds. There's, I believe, 4 questions, and go those, and then we'll use that as a basis for discussion. So if all's well, you should all be seeing a poll now, and please just quickly answer. Well, I'm actually seeing that no one, yes, now it's live. I thought we had a technical glitch. Now, what we have seen in some cases, Dean Aragon just made a message that he doesn't see it. I think in some organization, they don't actually allow the pop-up of the poll. And so if you've dialed in a different way, you may not be seeing it. I see that about 60% of the viewers are participating. That's actually up to 70% now. So if you're not able to see it, don't be frustrated, and trust the power of the crowd. And I will share those findings with you very quickly.
Yeah, I think whilst folks are polling, you know, it's interesting to see, you know, think about the timeliness of the work you did, Mark. You know, with the whole development of the role of the CMO and the impact, you know, the CMO has in the organization. And I think that's probably another shared focus that we all have, is this idea that you know, the CMO can be, and I've been an astute observer of the previous speakers to this speaker series, and I think many of them have emphasized that idea of the important and perhaps increasingly important role that CMOs play as sort of connecting the various pieces together. So, you know, I think that's very much an interesting discussion for me, as well as what trends are impacting our overall you know, experience as marketers and business leaders. So.
Well, you know, that's very much on point. Let's look at the findings. As you can see, the first question was really, to what degree do you believe that COVID-19 has made people more human-centric? And we started to talk about that. We'll talk a lot more about that. A full, almost 80% agree with that. The second question was, to what degree do you think that your company is shifting to strategy that is more embracing what we call the real growth agenda, but which is really about the multi-stakeholder perspective? And we see that there the answers are less pronounced. And we asked people finally what the 5 learnings were that they think have had the biggest impact over the last 2 months. And as we see there, empathy, quite strong. The biggest is actually the increase in remote working, and also the businesses needing to be more resilient. And we see here that the hard shift to e-commerce, which is very consistent with a poll that we ran among the participants of the Institute, is also very high. Quite high also the reskilling of people. So what we're seeing there is this human centricity, but primarily business resilience. Now, Michael, I referred to your role as teaching the world in 2025. If you think about what you taught then and what's happened since, this was only at the beginning of the year. What in your mind are big changes?
Yeah. Well, I think for those who didn't participate in the workshop directly, what we sought to do in that discussion was identify 10 sort of tensions that we saw in the world that were influencing not just how we thought about the world as marketers, or even as consumers, but really sort of more broadly as citizens of the world. And I think my general comment is that most, if not all, of those tensions, in some sense, have been accelerated or put under pressure. Two or three that I think I found particularly interesting. One, we had this whole discussion of whether technology was friend or foe. And it would seem to me that, for all of us, our relationship with technology and how some of these really critical life experiences are now being entirely mediated through technology has probably caused us to rethink our relationship to technology and the role it plays. And it's as simple as, the number of people of a generation that may have been historically challenged with some of the new technology, just embracing it and getting involved, because that was the way by which, that's the way by which we needed to connect to each other. So that's obviously a trend, I think, where the balance has shifted a little bit or sped up. The other discussion we had, which I've always found fascinating, and I think actually sort of speaks to one of the central ideas of the balance between the left brain and the right brain, or between math and meaning, or however you want to frame it, is a discussion around privacy and personalization. And clearly, there was already a growing movement. There was, and I'm sure will stay, a growing movement where we were much more cautious about how our data was being used. But it seems to me that COVID-19 and our reaction to the crisis probably may have pushed some of us to rethink or reframe or perhaps relax a little bit our attitudes, because clearly, if my safety and health can be improved by someone tracking my movements a little bit, or my medical condition, or my location, or something, then maybe I'll trade off a little bit of that. And the other one, I think, which is absolutely fascinating, and I don't know how this will work through, is we had a very rich discussion, I remember, with the participants around local versus global, and the shift that we had already seen back to sort of very local businesses and local brands. One sort of interesting trend I'd note, I'm sure many of you have sort of caught this in the media, it seems to be a topic recently, is the growth of what they call CSA, or community supported agriculture. And I find that a fascinating trend to watch. Most of the CSA organizations are reporting doubling or quadrupling of output and demand. And I think that has something to do with the movement we saw already. People are interested in eating and consuming product from local sources. But it also seems to me, and some people are explicit about this, it's a reaction to the fact that you just don't know how many people are touching your food, and what all the various points of interaction in the global food supply are with your food. Where if you're buying it from a local farm, and you have a much better insight, where it comes, who picks it, how often it was touched, etc. So maybe that's feels a little neurotic, but I think it's definitely accelerated a trend. And that's my general sense. A lot of what I see happening is the acceleration of things that were already ongoing. We never talked as a team about empathy, but I'm really happy to see that that's come up, Mark. I'm pleased to see that in your we didn't talk about it as a tension. Obviously, we talked about it as part of the overall humanizing growth story. But I'm pleased to see that empathy is popping up, and I'm pleased to hear that sort of humanizing element in business is now more apparent to people, because that was long overdue as well.
Well, that's interesting, because indeed you raise this point of humanizing. That's why it was in the poll. Obviously, these series are called the Humanizing Growth series, because the IRG research shows, as many other studies by BCG, McKinsey, and other impressive consultancies have shown, that when companies take a multi-stakeholder perspective, when they don't just adhere to shareholder primacy, but they go and transfer that interest to stakeholder interest, as the Business Roundtable did not that long ago, less than a year ago, redefining the purpose of an organization away from the Milton Friedman definition that said, make as much profit as you can for your shareholders and don't break the law. I think in this very recent crisis, we've seen an interesting development, because not many people would argue that before the crisis, two of the stakeholders, the customer and the shareholder, were well represented in the C-suite and strongly represented in business strategies. Those were the things that people most often speak about. Immediately after the crisis, what we've seen is that businesses have actually almost flipped their interest to the other two stakeholders. Number one, their colleagues, and number two, the community. Because those companies that actually were clear on their purpose to the community, those companies that therefore reacted more quickly because it was instinctual, because it was ingrained in the company ethos, those were the companies that were doing the things that communities needed very quickly. And that in stark contrast to companies where either the wording around purpose had been superficial and more like lipstick on a pig, or marketing led but not company owned. Those companies felt themselves short-footed, on the back foot. So we've seen a complete pivot on the focus of which stakeholder. But of course, moving forward, we're going to have to see strategies that truly represent what the company delivers in terms of value for all those stakeholders.
Right.
And there's
one
other. Yes.
Yeah, just one quick comment. I mean, I think also this sort of multi-stakeholder external view of the company represents something which we see going on internally, which is more collaboration and between the various stakeholders in the management and leadership of the company. I think we can't do our jobs as marketers without our colleagues in HR. We the field of marketing and PR, and we may get onto that itself, is already converging to some extent. But the idea that these boundaries and these barriers, which even in some of the more progressive companies still exist, what's happened, I think, with COVID and the way we've been forced to collaborate, and I use the word forced meaning it's just that our behavior has been compelled, not that we didn't want to do it, but jumping on Zoom calls, a lot more interdisciplinary thinking and conversations, and also to some extent a letting down of the guard, which I've seen, so people seem a bit more relaxed. That is another interesting aspect to what's happened here. It's not just that we have a more holistic view of our stakeholder, but we also perhaps hopefully are starting to think about ourselves as leaders and managers, etc., in a more holistic and multi-pronged approach as well.
Yeah, I think that's it's a really important point. I don't think anybody's been on a conference call where there hasn't been a toddler pulling at the side of one of your colleagues, or a cat walking across the screen. That happened to me once. That empathy. By the way, how is this changing your world? You're representative of education, but you're able to take a look at perspective that is, from the business side. And lots of companies need the universities, the educational institutions of the world to get them the people they need to help businesses grow. What's changing on the education side?
Well, I sort of give you maybe a short term and a long term. I mean, in the short term, and I can speak to my own experience, but I'm very much tapped into a large number of other professors in the field of marketing and social media and digital, etc. We've been remarkably flexible and resilient, if you want, adaptable, as have our students. Yeah, so in many cases, NYU is one of the most international schools in the US, if possibly the world, in terms of its breadth and diversity of representation. And so many of our students had to sort of head back home to the countries, places where they grew up with, etc. And I would say that in large measure, that's all been done with incredible grace. And people have understood, that they'll have to work under conditions that are not ideal, but they all want to make the best of it. And our faculty particularly has been absolutely dedicated, I think, to the academic progress of students. Early on, the president of NYU was very clear about that. The most critical thing is that we help our students on that path, that they, reach their personal and professional goals, and we won't miss a step. And so I think that in the near term, you've seen this sort of flourishing of flexibility and adaptability, especially around technology. And let's not forget, there are a lot of academics who probably felt, their role was to be what historically was called the sage from the stage. You're up there lecturing, etc. Arguably, that's a somewhat outdated mode anyway. But everyone's adaptive. Longer term, I think, is your real question, and the question we're all, asking ourselves, which is, arguably, the impact of digital technology, the globalization of education, was already having its impact on the formal field of education represented by big universities. Questions about the value of an undergrad degree, a master's degree, whatever. Those are all questions, and we are really looking at different modes of operating and different modes of engaging. I would say, and I've had some active discussions, it's very easy to characterize us, universities as sort of stuck in the mud, difficult to change, etc. But the reality is that most people's sort of cartoon version of education doesn't really exist. We for a long time, you take the School of Professional Studies, you take NYU more generally is a place that I think has been reimagining learning for probably 100 years or more. First university in the whole of the US to offer a practical course in public relations, for example, 100 years ago. Wonderful places like Gallatin, where you can do any individualized major you want, and the School of Professional Studies, which has always been about applied professional learning. So I think the outdated model of education to some extent was never true, but at the same time, your observation is right, that companies, the way we partner with companies, the way we partner with technology platforms, the way we partner internally, all of those things that are being explored and will lead to richer educational experiences. There's no question in my mind. It's a super positive thing. So
yeah. So if we, I've been thinking a little bit about this as well, Michael. I mean, we've seen these mass education media like Khan Academy. I have children. My oldest is 16. The discussion of colleges has come up, and the contrast is stark. A $70,000 per year school in the US versus a $12,000 or $13,000 school in Europe, with maybe some quality, but not proportionate quality differences. And my sense is that just as COVID has let us basically change the norms around what we accept in terms of privacy, there may very well be a change in the sticker value, the brand value of some of the brands that have been have lost touch with the value equation. And so what I like about where you are at the professional studies, you're already on the forefront of what companies themselves are doing in terms of training and what you're doing. And we had last week, we had Patricio with Jody Harris of ABI. One of the things that Jody has done for many years, I know, is run the internal capability development.
Right.
And I imagine there'll be some democratization of training, both pre-grad, but particularly as people get into jobs, and those jobs need different skills. That's why we had the skills question there. What in your mind are ways that universities and companies can actually start merging the best of two worlds there?
Well, I think one place where the university has historically always played an important role is it gives you a place to pause and reflect, and to do that with some context. Yeah. So it seems to me that, and that was my experience as a professional as well, that much of our life when we're working is so goal oriented, so very near-term focused, even perhaps bounded by the technology we're required to use, etc. And partnerships with universities, I think, allow participants to sort of step back, and through good guidance from a faculty member, an experienced faculty member, more the guy from the side now, not the sage from the stage, but the guy from the side can really help students, find some context, some reflection, etc. But specifically, I think that the universities also have always historically been great conduits for the discovery and the development of new ideas and new thinking and innovation. And that's a place where I think I see a lot of my colleagues. We have a wonderful HR program as well at the School of Professional Studies, looking at the whole sense of the future of work. And I see a lot of innovation coming out of teams there, more broadly around the use of analytics, how various disciplines partner together, etc. But those kind of questions are the questions that universities have had the privilege of asking, and figuring out ways to answer them in ways that are pragmatic and you can replicate and train people in. So the university is it's a great platform, I think, for the kinds of projects and initiatives that the companies want to develop. Whether we've been historically responsive enough or easy to deal with or any of those kind of questions, I think is separate, but the inherent potential. Yeah.
I think we've all had a kick under the butt in that sense. It's funny, we were having a conversation with some 50 CMOs yesterday, actually, the participants on the Institute for Real Growth Leadership Program. And one thing that's actually didn't come out of yesterday's conversation, but has been the important feedback along the way. We bring these people together, whether it's in person or actually now virtually. And the number one thing they always say is exactly what you said, this ability to just step back and think about what's important rather than what's just urgent right now. But an interesting development that I heard is that COVID has had that effect on a lot of people. So a lot of people have been cooped up in their study, in their attic, in their cellar, and they started to think about the things that really matter. And there seems to have been an explosion of creativity and just big thinking, I think, among these leaders. And so but that is actually in stark contrast to the ability of companies to do new things in the near future, because there's no cash,
right?
And you need to keep things simple. So there's going to be some kind of, I don't know, a real contradiction with all these great big ideas that these leaders are coming back to their businesses with for long-term growth, and the company's ability and the market's ability to accommodate them. Interesting contrast. Before I ask you the next question, Michael, I want to ask everyone or point out that if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will get to them. But Michael, I wanted to ask you to just go back to that empathy theme for a moment. We've talked a little bit, and within IRG we do a lot around the Da Vinci growth CMO. And what probably most people know about Da Vinci is that he was whole-brained. I mean, he literally was an artist and a scholar, a scientist and an engineer. So he brought those things together. And in a way, the way you talked about Yale and your theater management interdisciplinary course, that also felt very much like those coming together. Can you reflect a little on the importance of bringing those two together in the future?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I just want to say one quick thing in response to your discussion earlier, which is this notion about how much we will have imbued in these things that we've learned through deep. I think Carl Newman calls it deep work. There's a wonderful phrase in one of T.S. Eliot's poem. He talks about, after such knowledge, what forgiveness. And my sense with these wonderful experiences, you really can't go back. Once you've had that insight, once you've had that experience, it's very hard to go back. So I do think it will have long-lasting impact. This creativity and reflection will be very critical. Has already been very critical, I think. But to the question of sort of left brain, right brain, whole brain, I'm obviously I'd love to believe I'm sort of a living example of that. I'm someone who had an undergrad in English, studied the theater, but then pivoted much more towards practical things, management degrees, business, math, numbers. In fact, I don't mention it because I never quite finished it, but I was halfway through a master's in data science when I started my job at NYU at Berkeley. So, I'm absolutely passionate about, how you bring these two together. And indeed, Da Vinci's whole effort with the Vitruvian Man, the famous sketch that we all know, was about the marriage of math and art. You know, he was so fascinated by the technical proportionality of man and how to represent that, you know, in art.
Yeah.
And I think that these, you know, that sort of whole brain thinking is absolutely critical to everything we do today. And many psychologists and educators would tell you it's in some senses we lose that capacity, that we actually start off with that in life, and then through socialization and other things we're forced into one bucket or another. So, you know, it's incredibly important to me, you know, and I always I think the heart of it, just to be clear, is intellectual curiosity. And so it doesn't really matter which side of the equation you start on. And it maybe this relates to empathy in as well, is there's a desire to learn more, and also to learn more about things that perhaps you're not naturally comfortable with. The wonderful American playwright Anna Devere Smith talks about welcoming the unbidden. Yes, so we have to have that capacity in life to welcome things, embrace things that we didn't necessarily ask for, or knew we wanted, or even were seeking out, you know, and that I think is this sort of empathy, human empathy, but even perhaps empathy with ourselves, and where knowledge and insights and ideas will lead us is as critical as the discussion about the finite math versus meaning, you know.
Yeah, and of course, marketing these days brings a lot of this together, and I want to infuse some of the questions that our listeners or viewers are asking. One is Kirsten Allegri Williams. She's the CMO of SAP Human Services and Human Solutions, I should say. And so I understand why she's asking this. Are you actually training or rethinking the role that marketing needs to play, and therefore what you're teaching in terms of people, HR, culture, reskilling? Do you see big changes ahead?
Yes. So I think we are beginning to infuse that into our training. I think the question that all educators face is, how do you do that at the appropriate level of the student that you've got? Yeah. So you have to meet students where they're at. And, you know, many of our students come to us with an interest and a desire to get some of the, you know, what you might call core skills in marketing. You know, they want to advance in their career. They want to learn more about digital, or more about marketing analytics, or more about branding, etc. So you have to sort of meet that. That's actually part of the broader definition of servant leadership. You know, you have to serve the people to save the people. So you got to be sort of appropriate about how you integrate these ideas about the new role marketing plays. But absolutely, it's integral to how we think about things. And certainly when a student graduates, say, from our core master's program, I think it's somewhat unique to what we do at NYU, is they will have gone through various different programs, including what we call a C-suite leadership program, which is really encouraging them to think about the business enterprise more holistically, and their role as marketers in the overall business enterprise. And again, not just you know, the language of business, which is absolutely critical. It's one of the, I think, the foundations of the work we're doing together in the idea of growth and orienting yourself to the needs of business, but also this question about you know, the human capacity, the ability to you know, collaborate and to develop new solutions from disciplines you know, around you. And yeah, we're looking for those kind of opportunities all the time, because they're critical. They're absolutely critical.
Yeah, it's interesting because in a previous conversation with Greg Welsh of Spencer Stewart, a collaborator also and partner on the Institute for Real Growth, we talked about marketing capability and the fact that CMOs are often responsible for that part of capability development, but actually that if you take, for example, the work that Frank did on Insights 2020, there's an educator role of the marketer for the whole company. Education around the consumer, but now probably education around the whole stakeholder world around the company to get to that one version of the truth. We've talked in other conversations, and I'd like to delve into that a little further, about the collaboration between the CMO and the Chief Communication Officer. But before we go there, what about collaboration between HR and culture work? perhaps from your
Yeah.
Time Warner Cable time as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's absolutely critical. Historically, the marketing function felt it owned the consumer, and the HR function felt they owned the employee. But what we've learned, and some of this is my education since Time Warner as well, working with wonderful collaborators like Anna Tavis, who runs our HR program, is
Yes.
how much we can learn from each other. And let's be candid, both consumers and employees are human beings. They have human psychology. They are motivated potentially by some similar things. And there are also tools that have emerged that enable us to, think about those two disciplines in a shared fashion. One is analytics, and we both, I think to some extent HR has something to learn from marketing because we're a little ahead of that. But the other is the area of customer experience or employee experience or customer engagement, employee engagement. All those terms are, if not entirely interchangeable, at least draw from the same well of human experience and insight about psychology, etc. So those are places. And then clearly the broader question of building a culture. We talk about marketing at NYU SPS as human-centered and data-driven, yes, and in a sense that informs the culture. It's this capacity to balance those two things, when we drift too far in either direction, and drift away from the center, that's another way in which the collaboration with colleagues in HR really helps. I mean, they really help keep us focused and keep us grounded, and not just grounded in the needs of the employees, but grounded in the needs of wider publics and including our employees. So I see those. I think the C-suite seems to me to have become a much more dynamic and interesting place these days, and each of the leaders, looking for that space where they can contribute, either to the culture of the company. The definition, as we talked about, the multi-stakeholder view, or the growth of the company. There's a lot more, I think, both sort of broad holistic thinking and also more, targeted or focused thinking about the enterprise and how it grows, and lining up various functions around that. And we're trying to teach that and model that. Yeah.
Yeah, listening to you talk, Michael, reminds me of Diego. Diego Scotti, the chief marketing officer of Verizon, of course. And when he landed there, it was quite an old-fashioned marketing telco, huge, the biggest. And I think marketing was very much seen as a subservient, almost brochure department. And I think what he's done, as many CMOs have had to do over time, is actually help the company rediscover its purpose. And so why is it the marketer that's doing it and not the CEO? Well, it's not a reflection on Verizon, because the CEO hired the CMO to help him do that. But what we so often see is that there's a partnership there that then very quickly translates to a culture initiative. That translates to, if this is our purpose, how are we bringing that alive in all departments of this organization? And so very often we've seen change initiatives where there is that collaboration between HR and the leadership, often led or at least initiated by marketing, around a purpose to really think through what are the implications of that purpose for finance or for how we treat new hires. And I think that's probably, that type of work has led to some companies overperforming in their reaction to COVID, versus some of the ones that we've seen were either just totally went dark or reacted in the wrong way, don't you think?
Well, to some extent, maybe I'll be a bit polemical here. I think you could replace the word purpose with a number of other nouns. A shared sense of values helps. Absolutely. A shared sense of strategy helps. A shared sense of how you define your marketplace and what it means. How to play. Where to play and how to win, for example. So I think what's as critical as whether you have a defined purpose is whether you have a leadership team that has a shared sense of X, yes, and understands its contribution to achieving X, and understands how it plays relative to each other. So I would, without hopefully not being too polemical, I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be purpose. There are other ways by which, leadership teams can come together. For example, I mean, going back to the theme of fact-based marketing, or, even the idea which marketing teams introduced in many cases because they sat on the data about consumers, was an actual knowledge and insight, a shared knowledge and insight about our consumer, or more often consumers, segments of consumers. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things I enjoyed most at Time Warner, for example, was of developing a real understanding, including ethnographies and lots of work, unpacking, unpeeling who our consumers were, how we served them, what their needs were, and just that becoming a part of the shared conversation, or we even used the word vocabulary. We talked about the vocabulary among the senior leadership team, I think was helpful. It led to product innovation. It led to different ways to think about M&A. It led to different ways to forecast the growth of the business in the finance team, and it didn't necessarily need purpose at its center, but it needed some shared sense of a set of facts. And more importantly, we talk about the what, so what, and the now what. So it's not just the facts, it's understanding what the implications of those facts are. And then I think probably what's harder for senior teams is then to agree about what we should do about it, yes? So we know what the trend is, we have some sense of where it's going, but now we all have to agree, which means probably making trade-offs about what we do about it as a company. So, that shared purpose with a small p, I think, is actually important as well.
Yeah, I think we could probably debate till the cows come home. All the things you said, I think, are indeed about the purpose of an organization. What difference do we want to make in this world, and how you dress that up. But it isn't making more money. I think what we've noticed is that the making more money comes as a result of all the companies in all our initiatives that we've ever studied. We didn't come across any where there were very successful large companies that were created with the purpose of making more money. It was always first about somebody wanting to make a difference to the community around them, to really make a positive difference. If you think about Unilever up in the north of England, or Hershey here in Pennsylvania, but Patagonia today, or Natura, these are organizations that set out with that. But so often over the years, somehow the bean counters became the leaders, and the profit became the goal rather than the result. But you mentioned something about this bringing creativity and data together. That one single version of the truth is how Frank called it in his HBR article. And I think that's important because you did something very special there. You have data visualization as one of your areas of expertise. Aren't you bringing exactly those two together then?
Yes. Well, so as you know, data visualization is one of my passions, and I'm fascinated about it, particularly because in data visualization you have that marriage of quite deep analytical rigor, but also the sort of insight and the storytelling that comes from a visual medium. And I think it's a topic we haven't really talked about so much on this conversation, but that ability to tell stories is also becoming a very critical, need or function for senior leaders in companies. Translation is one aspect of it, but the ability to take data and through visual means, use vision to think, use vision to and data visualization to have impact, etc., has become absolutely critical. And yes, absolutely, it's this magic combination of how our brain perceives and how we sort of almost emotionally respond to things we see, which kind of causes us to better understand the data, for that data to sort of sit and allow us to sort of process. It's mediated through data visualization so much better than it is if you're looking at some boring set of tables. In our program, Mark, you know, because obviously we've been together sharing this, and Frank, we share the work of Hans Rosling. And I think Hans Rosling, probably for hopefully most, if not many of people on this call will know his work. And if not, definitely go Google him and look at TED. But, Hans Rosling had the amazing capacity to, through his data visualizations, to really affect people. or through affect, through emotion, really move people to better understand what was going on in the world. And you're seeing that, just to be clear, I think the charts and data visualization probably has become as prominent as anything in these COVID discussions. The word flattening the curve, I'm sure, will get nominated to be the phrase of 2020. And all of us, have become suddenly much more sophisticated at looking at charts and reading charts. And some of these charts are, quite complex. You've got log scales, and you've got, cumulative growth rates and all sorts of things. So I'm sort of really impressed. I think data visualization has had its moment in the sun recently, but it's definitely been part of my practice. Absolutely, storytelling. Though I think about frame it as storytelling. I think is really
and as you know, in the Da Vinci growth CMO profile, we call it courageous storyteller as one of the 5 attitudes of winning CMOs. But I think a picture is beginning to form quite well. You've got, on the one hand, you've got the necessity for right brain and left brain. Data visualization is a lovely one. It's this understanding of what's real, one version of the truth, and if that requires an understanding of how to communicate that to colleagues, to people that are developing the business strategy or government policy for that matter. There's one aspect of that. But what Da Vinci, of course, also was the humanist. So he brought the science, the art, and the fascination and love for not just the humans, but also the world and beyond. And so in my sense, our discussion has gone a little bit round circle because now that other world, the world around us and the individuals in that world, our colleagues, our customers, our communities, are desperately needing attention. It's a profile that is important, but it requires one other thing of the CMO that we haven't talked about, and I know is also in your background, which is this ability to message effectively, to communicate and manage the company's conversation with the outside world, which is typically the role of a chief communication officer. How do you see, just like with HR and culture, how do you see the CMO and the CCO collaborating or stepping on each other's toes when it goes badly? What have you seen and where do you think it's going?
Right. Well, it's a fascinating question, and I have the privilege of managing both the marketing and the PR programs and faculty, so I'm in those conversations quite often. I think that PR has historically there's lots to learn, I guess I would say, between the two disciplines, and starting with marketing, I think that PR has historically really been in the world of sort of developing and framing thought leadership. It was comfortable with that phrase before marketers were talking about it, and we were all talking about content management, for example, or content marketing. And so I think that is definitely an area where there's more collaboration, more opportunities for the two disciplines to work together. PR, for example, I think has always had a sort of broader or a different definition perhaps of brand, with a focus more on reputation and trust. And that more expansive definition of brand, partially through discussion of purpose, has become a much more integral part to how marketers need to think about their brand. So there's areas there where we're learning sort of more holistically about, what it means to be a brand. And the related idea, we probably discussed through already, is this idea of that a company has multiple stakeholders. Marketers traditionally perhaps were focused on the consumer, and PR folks would talk about their publics with a plural. They had multiple publics that they served, and I think perhaps more further reflection is communications functions, PR functions were very comfortable sort of translating their ideas into sort of policy and taking a position on important societal issues, etc. And you've seen that feed a lot of advertising. Nike is obviously the most obvious example, but lots of brands who understand that in order to communicate, they can't stand outside of some of these important societal issues. They need to take them on. Yes. So I think marketing's always had a good discipline about picking important cultural tensions and cultural moments, but I think PR is helping us really understand that we can be a bit bolder even maybe and take a position, take a stand on specific issues. So So it's
Well,
a very powerful combination.
you know, Edelman publishes the Trust Barometer, of
Hmm.
course, and what we've seen spiking already pre-COVID, but I think now it's probably through the roof, is this data point around employees wanting their employers to have a stance on things that go way beyond what the company is producing or who it's selling to on any day of the week. Stance on gender bias, on the environment, obviously. These are data points, you know, well in the 70s and above. And I think that in the preparation for this conversation, I had the benefit of listening or having a conversation with Johnny Wata, the
Hmm.
chairman, former CMO of Microsoft and the chairman of the Page Foundation. And he pointed out that there's a difference in the makeup, that CCOs or PR people generally are looking for risks and trying to prevent their CEO and their company from making mistakes. Marketers, I think, baseline, are optimists and opportunity seeking people, as you alluded to. So there's probably a great benefit in them working together very closely. And I think the discussion on who's in lead is really a red herring,
Yeah.
don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And John and Watt are both at IBM, and then, you know, in his leadership work at Page, I think, you know, has helped sort of set the agenda for some of those things. I mean, you know, the work that they've done in trying to define a new role for the CCO. If you read that as a marketer, you'd see a lot of overlap. You know, you'd see a lot of areas where they've identified, you know, functions for the discipline, including, interestingly, this emphasis on data and technology. I think we sometimes confuse data and technology. Then they're not the same. But you know, all of these industries and all of the leaders in these industries have to navigate these different domains. You know, none of us can avoid either being, you know, purpose-driven, being data-driven, you know, understanding how to implement technology and leverage technology. You know, this is the new currency, new vocabulary, whatever phrase you want to use for senior leaders in business generally.
Yeah.
You know, and you know how each function and discipline sort of frames it, and translates that into value. So you know, we talk about marketing as well as transformation of human insight into business value. That's a phrase one of my colleagues uses, Tom Cannon uses in the faculty. But you know, how we all essentially work at making that real is become critical.
Yeah, I think you said it already, and it's a theme that keeps coming up. It's really data-led, but human-centric, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And that's I think that's a nice place to end. Madhu asked from Unilever asked, are we seeing companies where indeed whether it's purpose or the role of the company in the wider community, where that was marketing led and is now becoming company prevalent or not? I think I'd be willing to say, based also on the poll that we saw here and yesterday among the participants, that we are seeing that shift, that we are seeing companies wake up. Let's be honest, the frontline workers are suddenly the heroes. A lot of CEOs with pay packages that are multiples in the tens in Europe and in the hundreds in the US of their lowest paid workers have really been forced to wake up, the rude awakening to their dependence on all these other workers. And that sense of this is not some nice luxury, the chairman's wife's favorite charity. We're talking about our role in society as a company. Mm-hmm. And I think we can probably agree on that. Huh? It's a real
absolutely.
Now, Michael,
and the ethics of it all as well, which I know one of your participants was interested in. You know, how we think about our role in life in an ethical framework as well. That's become very critical. Yep.
Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you, sparring with you, and working with you at the Institute for Real Growth. It was an honor that you took so much time to spend with us in this series. Next week, we have Keith Wheat, the former Chief Marketing Officer of Unilever, who I know you've also collaborated with and learned from, as have I. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to welcome everybody to that conversation also. And the week after that, interestingly, it's going to be Paul Pullman, who has left Unilever, but as CEO, oversaw one of the biggest corporate changes in history to human centricity. So Michael, thank you on behalf of everyone, and to all the listeners and viewers, thank you for coming again, and welcome to the next Human-Centric series, Friday from now. Bye-bye.
To you and Mark, many thanks. To you and Frank, many thanks.
Yes. Bye-bye, everyone.